world down. And for 2.5 years almost, I hadn't been out reading. And so I want to thank y'all for being here. I want to thank Kendall and the W for creating this cradle for writers. As mentioned in my bio, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 10 years ago, I moved here. When I moved here, my wife was 7 months pregnant. That was August 2012. And so that was exactly 10 years ago. And my kid's birth was supposed to happen in October in 2012, but he couldn't wait to come. So he came in September 15th of 2012. And Mississippi has become a second home to me. So again, as a writer and as a human, these kind of places are very, very special and very, very important. So again, thank you to the W, and let's give them a round of applause. And now I want to give y'all a round of applause for waking up this damn early. On a Friday, you could be sleeping in. And so I'm gonna count to 3 and I'm gonna ask for some energy. And by asking for energy, that just means like, whatever you feel like doing, you can clap your hands, you can stomp on the ground. Just don't punch nobody. Not that that's bad, it's just way too early for that. So I'm gonna count to 3 and y'all give me some energy. I'm gonna give y'all some energy back, okay? 1, 2, 3. All right, so I'm gonna read these poems from Come Kingdom. This is my latest book, LSU Press. I have to definitely give a shout out to Dave Smith, who's been my main editor for the most part for the last 2 books. When I wrote this book, I told myself that I wouldn't write a book for a long time. I had wrote Stripper in Wonderland, that came out in 2017. And after that, I said I wouldn't write another book for a while. There's this saying, and I think when I was younger, it sounded dumb. And regardless, I think of your spirituality, it might resonate with you. And it says, tell God your plans and watch him laugh, right? And so I said I wouldn't write another book for a long time, and then life happened. And so this book chronicles a couple with a kid that's trying to make another kid. And I think that's all the context I'll give you. And then there's a dad thing, and I'm going to hopefully get to those poems. The first poem is called, that I'm going to read is called Homecoming King. Homecoming King. My mother suffers from fibromyalgia and can only listen to Gladys Knight during the day. Each night, she's a prisoner to the revolver my father placed to her head 1,000,000 bruises ago. Each night, she counts threats like sheep, says trauma is a son of a bitch. Tricky little fucker who shadows like the man, Jeff, who came after my father split. I still think of killing Jeff. I'm unsure that not doing so makes me a conservationist. I believe he should be honored. Of all the shitty people I've met in my life, it's like winning the fucking lottery. I'm going somewhere with this. 4 months ago, my father left the jailhouse. I'm told he spent a month in solitary confinement for fighting with himself. He swears it was some boogeyman with tattoos and red hair, a mile-long rap sheet. 3 months ago, I wired my father get-by money from a Walmart in Mississippi. 2 months ago, no one could find my father. 2 days ago, my father called and no one could find me. Yesterday, my sister said she gave him get-by money. I haven't seen my uncles since being racist became cool again. I wonder which taverns they're haunting. I wonder the phantasm haunting them. One of my uncles donate plasma for $20 a pop. Hasn't worked a job since this old lady stabbed him in the forearm. That was before grandma died. And everything around us started getting old. Even newborn babies started getting old. My father wants to know if we made our son a sibling to help bury us. Says it's my birthright to be carried by a daughter's hands. Sometimes between me and y'all, I call my sister and hang up before she answers. I call my mother and hang up before she begins mentioning death. Y'all don't have to do that. So here's the hedge I'll say. Y'all don't be sad, okay? These are poems that start here, but hopefully we'll go here at some point. All right. When you're born and raised in a very hyper-masculine environment like I was, there's a lot that you don't know how to do. And I thank young people for teaching me how to be a better human, a better person, a better citizen. And I say this because let's pretend this isn't me. The speaker in this book and the woman that's being referenced, they're trying to have another kid. And growing up in a hyper masculine environment, what you're told is that it can never be you as a man, right? It can never be you. If y'all are not procreating, it's never your fault. You a dude, right? You know, you work out, right? And so the most humbling aspect of maybe that journey is when you find yourself at the urologist, because when her gynecologist says, let's check your husband. And growing up in a hyper-masculine environment, you say, check me, right? Please check me, right? And then sometimes it humbles you. At the urologist, last week, my uncle had a heart attack and died on the floor of his one-bedroom apartment. His body discovered on Wednesday. We don't know how long he'd been lying there. Last week, a friend lost half her nose, face cancer removal. I'm sitting in a urologist's waiting room. I'm sitting in a urologist's waiting room, waiting to die from too much waiting. I'm at this waiting stage of my life, and I don't know when things became this way. Two elderly women walk across the room holding hands. They collectively do paperwork. One calls the other mom. I'm considering every bad decision. I'm considering the condition of the testicles I'm sitting on. I'm considering the health of sperm and blood and urine, the price of these things inside of me. What, dear Lord, are they really for? A middle-aged man in a cowboy hat leans against the front desk, clutching a yellow paper. He's whispering to the secretary. He's asking why our maker manufactures all this complicated beauty. Okay, I see my nieces and nephews are in here. Y'all okay? All right. Trying to figure out what to read next because my nieces and nephews just walked in. Cover your ears. I have a 10-year-old at home. Okay, we'll lighten up after this, maybe. This is called I Hate My Father for His Vasectomy. They don't know what that word is, right? I hate my father for his vasectomy. Each day, my aunts call asking what I plan to do, telling me you finally hit rock bottom, saying moss is growing all around you. I tell them I plan to do nothing. I've tried saving you my whole life. Back when you crashed your Harley and seemingly broke every small god from the waist down, I fed you crown while you loathed in a river of muddy waters. You swore muddy was an all of the above answer for any question darkness could present. My mother swore wiping your butt was harder than taking you back each time you went absent. You healed as all good boogeymen do. Wipe blues from your face, then continued your quest of overthrowing kingdoms. I've seen whole husbands become half man around you, seen you move into another man's castle after hauling his things to the sad side of town. I always thought a love triangle would finish you. My aunts hate me when I tell them I plan to do nothing. They don't say it, but I've been hated enough times to know. I'm told hate is like holding your breath and expecting someone else to suffocate. Sometimes I hold my breath until I'm almost blue. I hold my breath until my phone rings and someone tells me you're suffocating and everything around you has turned deep blue. You called 3 days ago. We shared our favorite scars and laughed at my aunts for thinking you couldn't be saved by God's sin greater than me. You said you'll die in the rapture of a speakeasy's last call. I told you I was coming back to Milwaukee in 2 weeks. You told me the sky is falling on its face. The second part of this book is called Talking Dirty to the Kingdom, and it's after Yusef Komunyaka's Talking Dirty to the Gods book. And so the poems are written in 4 quatrains. And the challenge for me was thinking about, let me be very honest, I always felt like writing about pop culture would date my work as if I'm that important. Like, no, I'm not going to talk about anything going on right now because in 100 years when they read my work, what if they don't know who Kanye is? And they're like, you know, my great grandkids, like, who is Kanye? Like, I don't need them to ask those questions, just read the work. And so I challenged myself to write some pop culture poems, and I don't know how well I did, but I'm proud of the attempt. And so this is part 4 in that series. There's 12 poems in that series, Talking Dirty to the Kingdom. And I think this is apropos. Someone needs to do something about Kanye. I feel like that should be the poem. Like, that's it. Someone needs to do something about Kanye. Or maybe Kanye needs to do something about someone. Or possibly, if your name begins with a K, you shouldn't be allowed to marry someone whose name begins with a K. Or perhaps you too shouldn't be allowed to have a baby whose name begins with a K. I'm saying 3 Ks in one frame is an alarming gospel. Or maybe the crosses failed me because I couldn't hang. Can we be failed by artistry stronger than a hummingbird in a dope house? Or a dope fiend catching the Holy Ghost in the middle of a dope-ass cathedral? Kanye is spreading his God's word like the drunkard outside McDonald's on Wabash, who told me Jesus still walks Chicago like sanctified peasants parading Michelangelo's pearly paradise. When I was maybe, I think I was like in 7th grade. Well, when did The Bodyguard, the movie, come out? Was that like 92, 93? 92, yeah. So I was 12. I'm 42 now, so I was like 12. So this was before, like, obviously, like cell phones and all that good stuff. And we would have a study hall. And with study hall, you could go to the library if you were a good student. And I was a good student. So during study hall, I'd say, I'm going to go do some research. And I go to the library. I'm 12. And I had saw The Bodyguard. And for those of you that haven't seen it, it makes me feel old to say it's an old school flick. Still feels new to me. I fell in love with Whitney Houston. And I'm 12. And so when I would take my hall pass and go to study hall, I would research Whitney Houston. You know, not science, not history, Whitney Houston. And so this is a poem for, obviously, we lost Whitney Houston 16 years ago, maybe. It's been a minute. I still lived in Milwaukee at the time. So this is a poem for Whitney Houston. Again, this is in the same series of the Talking Dirty to the Kingdom. This is 6. Whitney, I'm praising you from a porch swing in Mississippi. Been wanting to tell you I was saving my virginity and all the mystery of my 12-year-old body for you. Saving my maiden orgasm for you. Wanting to save you, Rachel Marin, as only a puberty packing Black boy could. This is for Kevin Costner. How dare he so begrudgingly become your bodyguard? How dare Farmer act like that was uneventful? Whitney, I couldn't throw a knife into the rib of an oak, but I swear I would have protected you from that creepy ass dude. At 12, I could outrun the neighborhood and would have taken that bullet too. Our production would have ended this way. You running from the plane to me. Zebra, royal headdress, a halo. Me not letting go. Sanctified, becoming more 12-year-old man each moment. My head buried in you. I think I'll read maybe 2 more. I'm going to read 2 quarantine poems. What's ironic is that when I started reading quarantine poems a little over 2 years ago, I was like, what are they doing? Like, y'all haven't even had time to process what's happening, and we're already pumping out quarantine poems. And then I found myself writing quarantine poems. I don't know if y'all remember it sounds like it was like a million years ago, but the virtual DJs. Anybody, did y'all listen to the virtual DJs under quarantine? No? Okay. Well, yeah, right. Someone was like, hey, just log into Instagram and D Nice is spinning today. And I was like, that sounds dumb. And then after 3 months of being in the house, it became an event. Pulling up your laptop and listening to D Nice spin records because you've been at home and you can't go outside. Quarantine after Mark Doty. If there were sirens for this, they'd be sirening. If this was post-apocalyptic drama, then fiends would be fiending. Let's say this: I'm the villain in the theater of no touching. No touching, savior of relentless no script. Hero of saving no thing. A crackhead predicted this. Said there shall be the year of no touching. The world will know what it is to kiss distance. Remember believing in nothing when Ezekiel's siren. Little buddy, don't you believe the king's coming back like baby daddies and tax returns? Remember what you know good, Hollywood. Crackheads saving more lives than Black Jesus. Jesus is real. I've seen him in quarantine. Invisible miracle giver. Remember a child's seizure? Swarming like a crown of thorns, the Messiah's body becoming bread and grape-themed tableau. Remember lonely hands, an errand with mask on, DJing, miscarriages gathering, records that were never supposed to scratch. This is the last one. Thank y'all so much for listening. Another quarantine poem. Again, I talked about the couple, right? They're in lockdown and they would love to make a baby. This is called 40 Days and 40 Nights. Rooted in the haven you made home, sinful floorboards, pregnancy catastrophes and all, mold collecting throughout gutters, vultures pitch tents, and after 13 days, the grizzlies can sniff the determination. She says, Granny said a man and a woman wanting to make a baby should keep on keeping on until someone starts dreaming of whales. Somewhere, Moby Dick is dreaming a school of prey he'll devour. Somewhere, a Black body is molested in silence. Somewhere, a 12 is reaching for a holster under a God who can't believe this is happening again. God is mumbling something about free will. The ancestors are screaming something about stewardship. The woman in lockdown is pleading something about an unblessed union. She's saying this, honey, pray with me before we make love. Dear Lord, bless us with life. We're good people who don't ask for much. Please bless my husband's body with perfection and our coming together with precision. If it is your will, dear Lord, we'll keep doing this because what else is there to do? Everyone outside is dying. Just yesterday, a boy outside our window wouldn't stop running. Just yesterday, my husband came to me with barren eyes, and he wouldn't stop coming. Thank you. Questions?
Let me tell you that the MFA low residency program loves you. Specifically, we were really touched by the last pony sharing how you write about it's related from a male perspective, which none of us heard before. And I'd just like to hear you say more about that. Specifically, what you think the barriers might be for other men speaking out, and also how your willingness to write about that interacts with other aspects.
Thank you so much for that question. What's your name?
I'm Erin. Thank you.
Aaron, thank you for that question. Here's what I want to say. I think when I was working on this collection, again, I didn't intend to write this. I didn't want to write this. My closest friends be like, write whatever you want to write. But my closest friends who are writers, right, who I confide in, I talk to them a lot throughout this process. And I think at the beginning, I use it as a vehicle of catharsis. I didn't really think I would share the work. And the more I talk to the friends that I confide to and confide with, especially my friends who are women, said, you need to share this. No one is writing this story. This humbling, for me, it was very humbling. And so, as a disclaimer, and I know a lot of us are teachers out here, everything in here is not 100% fact, right? You start writing the work and then you allow it to take its own journey, right? So it might start in something that's very real and that's very true. I shouldn't say true, I'd say fact, right? Because truth could be something that's more, that has more emotional context, right? So we could all leave here and say it was a great time and we had a great, morning. And the fact could be someone in the front row was like, it sucked, right? But maybe collectively, our collective truth is it was a good morning. And so it was me reaching for truth. And I started to realize, and Aaron, this is me being very honest, I'm not like, that's not fair to say. I want to say I'm not the traditional writers. The majority of my best friends are not writers. They're just dudes back home in Milwaukee that I grew up with who do real estate, construction work. One guy does commercial development, and when I started to think about my circle, the guys that I talk to every day, I realized that we talked a lot about the Bucks winning that championship 2 years ago. Like, oh my God, did you see Giannis? Like, oh my, Chris Middleton, he got hurt, bro. Like, it was a lot of that talk. But none of us said, how was your annual? We didn't have those conversations, right? And none of us said, when's the last time you went to the optometrist to check on your eyesight. Like, no, bro, I can see. No, the way you driving, fam, you cannot see. Like, let me drive, you know? And so I'm kind of writing to the lay person, even if they don't read this book. I'm writing to my friends and my homeboys that I grew up with who, you know, purchase my books 10 at a time. And when I ask them, like, what'd you think of the poems? They say, no, fam, I know you dope. Like, I ain't read them, but I'm gonna give them away, right? But I'm hoping that they open it up. But also it's opening up conversations for us. Because now I'm having those conversations. I have a group chat with my guys, and once a week, we show our blood pressure. We wake up on a Monday, and that's our check-in. Where before our check-in used to be, I'm at the game, right? But now our check-in is like, what's your blood pressure like? You know, and so this is just one book, and this is just a conversation, but I'm hoping it could spark larger conversations amongst men who are used to, I mentioned at the start of this, growing up in a very hyper-masculine environment. And my father and I are really tight, and we're only 20 years apart. So if I'm 42, he's 62. And now I'm asking him questions about, Pops, how's your blood pressure? He's like, what's wrong with you, man? I'm like, you know, I'm checking in on you, right? So I'm just hoping that this starts and sparks maybe a conversation, at least amongst my group. And if people are reading this, that it might spark some larger conversations. But thank you for that question, Aaron. Yeah.
Kind of to go along with Aaron's question, I have a lot, but just the one. The cover art and the content, they seem, you know, one seems very like typical, like hyper masculine, like you talked about, but the content is so intimate. So can you talk about like a little, like your ideas behind the two and how you connect the two? Because we discussed it in class and we were really interested in your thoughts on the connection between the cover and the content.
Absolutely. What's your name again? We met last night.
Yeah, Megan.
Megan.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. So because I didn't think that I would write a book of poetry for a while, when I started writing these poems, Biggie, okay, so I was coming up in the 90s with Tupac and Notorious B.I.G., right? Biggie has a line that says, treat your first like your last and your last like your first. And I'm obsessive over music. I love music. Like, that's my thing. If I'm in a car, if I'm in my office, my students come through and I'm doing office hours and I'm playing some jazz, Miles Davis is in the background. But he says, treat your last like your first and your first like your last. And so once I started embarking upon this book, what I told myself is, Derrick, write this as if you will never write another book again. So if there's anything you want to say, if there's anything you want to do, if you believe at some point you'll have grandchildren, if they want to know something about you, put it in here, right? And so that's how I approach this collection. Hopefully I'll write more books, but I don't know. I'm not writing anything right now, right? My favorite album ever, my favorite artist, it's very close between Anita Baker and Marvin Gaye. And I love Marvin Gaye. And a big part of me loving Marvin Gaye was my dad loved Marvin Gaye. And so I grew up and my dad had records in the crib, right? And so I'm like 12 and he'd be frying chicken, drinking PBRs, listening to Marvin Gaye. And he'd be like, flip it over, right? The record. And I'd flip the record over. My favorite album of Marvin Gaye is called Here, My Dear. If y'all have cell phones, I'm giving y'all permission to pull them out and find the cover of Marvin Gaye's album, Here, My Dear. I'm gonna give y'all 30 seconds to do that. I am a teacher at heart. Oh yeah. Here, My Dear. H-E-R-E, my dear, D-E-A-R. So the story goes with Marvin Gaye's Here, My Dear, is that him and Anna, his wife at the time, were getting a divorce. And Anna asked Marvin for $1 million I started getting divorced, right? This is what I need to get divorced. Marvin says, I don't have $1 million. But then Marvin says, here's what I'll do in the settlement. I'll make an album and you can have all the proceeds. Here, My Dear went on to make way more than $1 million. And Marvin Gaye never saw a penny. On the cover of Here, My Dear, you see Marvin's face on a statue. That's my favorite album of all time. When I finish this collection, again, my first, like my last, maybe this is the last book I will ever write. Backtrack a little bit. I asked myself, how can I write something that feels like Here, My Dear? Because that album chronicles their divorce. Marvin is a storyteller and I'm a narrative poet, right? I tell stories in my work. And so my thinking was, how can I create a body of work that feels like Here, My Dear felt to me? If I go listen to that in the car right now, y'all won't find me for like 4 hours. So I'll just loop it over and over again. It's such a beautiful album. It's such a traumatic album. It's such a sad album. And there are happy moments. And so what I told myself is that this is my Here, My Dear, right? And I asked LSU, let's do a cover like that. And they said, you're gonna get the cover you're gonna get. Right, as y'all know, right? I'm like, no, it's gonna be just like Marvin's. But to my surprise, when I saw the cover, this was it. And that's exactly what I wanted, right? And so essentially you see this person on the front that's kind of modeling Here, My Dear, mirroring Here, My Dear, because the vulnerability of the body on the cover is the vulnerability that comes inside the poems. Maybe time for one more or no? Okay, thank y'all.
All right, our next speaker is Jocelyn Nicole Johnson. She lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she teaches art in the public school system. Her writing has appeared in Guernica, The Guardian, Quelly Journal, and elsewhere. Her short story, Control Negro, was anthologized in the Best American Short Stories. Among its many awards, her book, My Monticello, won the Weatherford Award, the Balcones Fiction Prize, and the Lillian Smith Award, as well as the LA Times debut Seidenbaum Prize and the Library of Virginia People Choice Awards for fiction. Set in the near future, My Monticello tells the story of a diverse group of Charlottesville neighbors fleeing violent white supremacists, as well as several other short stories featuring Virginia's landscape and people. In a book review for the New York Times, Bridget M. Davis writes that the novella reminds me of what fiction does best, reflect our reality back at us just when we need it most. My Monticello aches with both resonance and timeliness, engaging in rich conversation with recent real-life events never far from our minds. And it is now being turned into a Netflix movie. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? Let me get set up here. It's nice to see you this morning. This is my first time in Mississippi. So I'm going to read the second story. It's called Virginia is Not Your Home. This is a collection with 5 stories in that novella that was in the introduction there. But I kept changing my mind about what to read, and this felt like the right story, so we will see. It's a story about someone who wants to change her name. She wants to change where she's from. When I went to college a long time ago, I knew a lot of people who were like, call me Rusty now. Like they just changed their name. And I always thought that was fascinating, this idea of wanting to change. This isn't my story. The biography in it isn't mine, but I was born and raised in Virginia. And my parents, my mom, my dad, as well as my older brother, were all born in Lexington, South Carolina, where my grandma, all my aunties, uncles, and tons of cousins live. And so I inherited this kind of dual sense of home. We would drive 10 hours home to Lexington, and then we'd get in the car and drive 10 hours back home to Virginia. And this complicated idea of home, this idea of belonging, really animated this particular collection, this debut collection of stories. And this used to be, Virginia is Not Your Home used to be the title of the entire collection before I wrote the novella, My Monticello. Lastly, I would like to say that there's 5 stories in the novella. They're all really different. The voices are different in them. So if you don't like this one, you might like another one. Virginia is not your home. They hung that name on you at birth, but Virginia was never your home. Read Nausea by Sartre and give yourself a new one. Trumpet your new name to the liver-spotted washroom mirror like a coronation. Gape your mouth, then angle your tongue behind your teeth. While you're at it, work to remedy those other afflictions, that fetid high hill R that has planted itself in the middle of words like wash. Scrub the stink of manure from your clothing, and while your young body churns over the basin, keep whispering your new, still secret name. Believe that if you can just change this, you can change everything. When your furtive girl body begins to unfold, pull your hair back so severely that the boys don't tug you down beneath the bleachers. Take to wearing father's stable flannels to ward off solicitations to their string of tissue paper dances. Don't accept it when they ask, "Who do you think you are?" Whenever you test some sweet, protracted word on your tongue. Don't accept the moldy hymnals, the marquee salvations, the wayward way that mama courts heaven like a scornful lover. Don't ache too badly for the milk cows in the pasture, their slick, contoured ribs pressing through. Take French, lock your doors, and trust in your 16-year-old self. Fill out an array of applications, but don't tell mama when you win a scholarship to an all-girls college toward the center of the state. Instead, let the screen door clap closed behind you. Feel brisk air rush by as you sprint barefoot through her hand-me-down fields. Run past the paddock where your father attends to their cruelest horses, all the way to the muddy creek banks. As breath stings your lungs and a stitch crawls up your rib cage, howl victorious into the night sky. At freshman orientation, chew up and swallow the first name tag they give you. Write yourself a new one. Someday soon, you'll make it official, this new and chosen name. Smile with restraint so that no one can question the slant of your eye teeth, those hidden incisors, white as fresh milk, since, according to mama, there was fluoride in the well water. According to mama, she did not expect a dusky girl child like you, never mind father's complexion. According to mama, nothing is promised in this world. Tell the other girls you've lost both your parents when they ask why you didn't go home over Thanksgiving break. In the coming months, they'll invite you places, a cottage on the Cape, a brownstone in Georgetown for New Year's Eve. These young women who grouse over dining hall menus, who can't imagine divining a supper from scraps. Take note of their line of first edition books along their parents' mantles. Read Camus and Kafka to tatters. Read Simone de Beauvoir. Work harder still, and as soon as you are able, transfer to a bigger school, one with a better language department. Don't fret that it still sits in your home and your namesake state, Virginia or Jenny, like that one sweet-faced grade school friend used to call you. Those girls you grew up with who preened in pickup headlights, who got themselves knocked up and then abandoned before they reached legal drinking age. Work double shifts at the rural country club on the outskirts of your Blue Ridge college town. The steep, winding bike rides make you feel like you've hardly left the place that reared you. Shuttle trays to large round tables, gin and tonics, jumbo shrimp cocktails, chicken cordon bleus, ancient couples shift in three-piece suits and gowns glinting with costume jewelry. All that pomp against your black V-neck sweaters and second skin leggings, your hair always coming undone around your face. The men ogle your cleavage. A few pinch your bottom and say, smile, why don't you? Watch how, as soon as their wives turn away, they circle back and lay more money on your table. Save every goddamn penny and buy a plane ticket to Europe. Ride the trains from Firenze to Prague, from Prague to Munich. Tell yourself, I am here, like a song. Tell yourself, here is history and culture and power. Here are the old writers who wrote books that you believe saved you. Here you are with your notebook outside a cafe. If you hold your mouth just right, you feel like you nearly belong. Never mind that the cobblestone underfoot recall your steep and rutted driveway, that the hostel's duvets summon mama's mildewed quilts. Bolt upright in a sleeping carriage at the knock in the night as your train crosses yet another border. Curt foreign voices demand passaporte. Hand over your full and legal name. Outside a discotheque in Paris, lean into a striking dark-haired man. He whispers your chosen name to you, his accent making it new again. When he asks where you're from, list a string of cities you hope to soon visit. Tell him London, tell him Barcelona, tell him Tangier. Hurry back to his place and allow him to take you, a satisfying shock like diving into spring water. Call out in an elegant string of R's followed by a sob of release. Turn your head, catch the eye of another man, less beautiful, but an artist, a photographer, and from a good French family. Don't go to bed with the second man right away. Stay with him and his family sprawling flat in the city, rooms framed in velvet curtains, arranged under dusty chandeliers. Stay with him well past your flight, for forfeiting your final fall semester. Promise yourself you'll go back and graduate in the spring. Marry this man in 9 months' time, a tiny secular ceremony back at your parents' home. The animals have all been sold off or buried, but there is still one near level field. Tell yourself it's only a handful of days. It makes sense that your husband-to-be needed to see this place. Don't tremble inside those peeling paint walls as you hear your father's lone voice echo in a darkened hallway. Don't startle when mama lays a tattered family Bible in your hands. Silver photos chafe between yellowed pages, your own stark and shining maternal ancestors whose lives ended here where yours began. Rent a place near DC, just outside of the Beltway. A posh agency there wants to represent your husband's work. Tell yourself it will be 6 months more in Virginia, a year at most. Your husband photographs looming constructions, bridges, facades. He's out the door before the light breaks to brilliance, and he works through sunset when the day is near golden again. Come winter, Metro to the National Mall, emptied of tourists. There you are, a bright dot of a woman, alone in a wide gray landscape. Peel off your red gloves, blow heat into your pinkened palms. Scrawl something you remember of that time in Europe, a story you hope of a girl who got away. Come spring, dredge yourself from a nightmare of sinking to find yourself unaccountably seasick. Your husband is away in Rome, photographing famous ruins. Accept that this is your fault. After all these years of brutal care, you've been reckless in the ways you've wanted, as if there is no end to want, as if the hungry burden of your husband's foreign body could free you from your own. Motherhood presents itself as a dull ache at your center. Your husband sounds ecstatic on the phone. He'll be home in 5 days, 7 at most. Hang up and call mama, who gets to sobbing from joy, from grief. Eat unrolled ho-hos and fried thick-cut bologna. Don't ask yourself, where am I heading now? Abandon yourself to wrenching labor, break open and birth a son. 18 months later, carry a girl, a daughter. Choose your son's name, a clever French one, but let your husband name the girl. It sounds like a fine name the way he first says it, though your daughter soon plucks a nickname from it, perky and provincial. Your husband's career continues to live, his vivid landscapes lining gallery walls. While his agency flies him all over the world, you are tasked to stay behind and raise the children. Dig your nails into your thighs each night, but never let the inky bruises show. Let your husband buy you a house in the suburbs, an outpost from which to raise these fair and fickle beings. Whenever he's home, petition him still. Tell him you could live in Bordeaux or Brussels. Tell him you would live in Madrid. Never mind that you already know his stock answer, that the money is better working from the States. Insist on one long trip to Europe each summer, though it reminds you how big the world remains. Stay near La Rochelle, not far from the water, where your husband's mother now lives. His mother, who maintains that your wedding was trop long. I don't speak French, so if I said that wrong. Who dresses in crisp linen and plants dry kisses on the children's cheeks. The whole time you've known her, she's kept the same servant, a North African lady who cleans and cooks and shops like a wife. When you glimpse this second serf of a woman, feel outraged and full of envy. Those early years are trying. Persist. The children beg you to play on hands and knees. The children run screaming to greet their father whenever he bursts through the front door. Notice the lavish way he lifts them with only a wary peck on the cheek left for you. Jet-lagged, he collapses on the king-sized bed, leaving luggage for you to unpack. Much later, when you wake to the light of his cell phone, its blue glow in his eyes, and your shared bed lurching to his needy rhythms. Let yourself feel something too, a pulsing sadness, a lumen of want. Even though before you can whisper his name, he emits a shuddering groan that gives way to snoring. Notice how quickly the years are unfurling. The children double, then triple themselves. The boy is 5, the girl is 10, the boy is 15. Your husband's gone bald, but women still swoon at his stubbled jaw and muscled chest. You hear him outside, cursing softly to himself below your open bedroom window. That is the same moment you find a stack in the back of your closet, old forgotten journals full of your eager and awful words. Gawk at those futile straying stories, but don't pick up the phone when it rings. Mama's voice lifts up out of the machine to tell you that your father has passed. You feel numb and at the same time untethered, as if an invisible cord that anchored you has now been let go. After the funeral, you stop at a stop sign in town. Your husband palms your stockinged knee. Believe he is consoling you when he says, "Shall we consider moving here for your mother's sake?" Promise yourself you'll never go back, but take Mama's calls every night. Each small thing she says makes its own kind of sense, but taken out all together, they sound outlandish. Your husband has been home for 6 weeks in a row, his unflagging presence setting all of your routines askew. Turn away when he mentions moving in with your mother, though he makes it sound like a high-wire trick that might well save you. See how he sidesteps talk of his dwindling work, the partial mortgage payments, the growing distances between you. Put the house on the market and see what it will bring. What else can you do? Accept the highest middling bid and let your husband call this freedom. Your son, tall as you, makes fist when you tell him. His mouth twists as if he's holding kindling inside it. Your mother slams her bedroom door, leaving you outside. Your daughter slams her bedroom door, leaving you outside of its dry rattle. Press your ear to hear her mule on the phone to a middle school boyfriend, a person you'll never meet. Those first weeks back home are trying. Hold on. The old rambling house is a circus, and Mama's confusion, a new grotesque exhibit. See how she stumbles over the children's name, how she acts like a child herself some days. One bleak winter night, she wanders off, though you don't realize she's missing till the corded phone in the kitchen blares. Some city-sounding couple is on the line. They've bought your old neighbor's place. Race down to find Mama in your car's searching headlights, alone in a grove of pine, a flood of relief. Your own shrinking Mama, caped in a mossy quilt and spinning, your son's filthy sneakers like rank mittens on her hands. Move Mama into a nursing home and visit every day. Even though whenever you walk in, her body seizes in agitation, take a break, don't go back, one day, then another until a week has passed. The first time you return, Mama grasped the arm of a passing stranger, a staff member. You hear Mama beg this uniformed person to tell her who in the world you are. Your husband accepts sporadic assignments up and down the coast. He drives to Lexington, to Front Royal, leaving you carless and stranded. He shoots portraits and street fairs and weddings, all of it intimate and fleeting. Eventually, he packs his camera away, reminding you that he's always loved jazz music. He uses the last of your savings to open a boutique record store in a strip mall in town. The children attend your old high school classrooms from where you once plotted escape. Each day they grow less tied to you, leaving longer swaths of your days free. One rainy morning, after dropping off your husband, you collect a rustling stack of applications. Tell yourself they are for your daughter, but never show them to her. What could you do here with no real qualifications, having never even finished your degree? Could you be a clerk, a secretary? Could you wait tables again? Mulch mama's feral azaleas. Resurrect the kitchen garden that fed you as a child. Fashion raised beds from the railroad ties you find abandoned behind the shed. Eat lunch on the side porch. White bread with sliced tomatoes, your native hair loosed and scraping your shoulders, your face turned into the breeze. The next time you visit Mama at the nursing home, she flies up in her wheelchair. She clutches you with such ferocity. It feels like you've only just met this woman who raised you. There are letters in the house, she says, letters your lonesome and stoic father once penned to you. Promise me you'll find them, Mama says, still squeezing. Hold her cloudy glaze. Let her warm breath fog your face. Rifle through drawers, overturn crates, leaving everything gaping and churned. After days of fruitless searching, admit to yourself that you want to believe. Read in bed by ochre lamplight of glaciers liquefying and waves of refugees breaching Europe. When your husband asks, what's the matter with you? Let your old wounds gleam. Look at him and plead, take me away, though you don't know where there is to go exactly. Your husband answers in French, so quickly you can't catch the words. When you ask him to repeat himself, he reaches over and past you, and with one sharp click, he pitches the room to black. After you and your husband separate for good, fill out each application. With central hiring and background checks, your legal name is required here again. All this time you promised yourself you'd change it, and now it feels too late. As you hurry out of the new super Walmart, don't dwell on the line of accented girls working 3 registers in a row. Did they come from Ethiopia, from Egypt? How did they end up belonging better than you in your nowhere hilltop town? Balance heavy bags of groceries in the crooks of your arms and pinch yourself to keep from crying. Your nearly grown children sleepwalk beside you, the girl a sophomore, the boy a senior, slated to leave for college soon out of state. Their eyes remain pinned to their cell phones, devices of which you don't approve. They were given to them by their father to keep in touch now that he's moved back to Europe. Keep moving and look straight ahead when you hear someone call after you. Virginia, Virginia. The voice draws nearer as you quicken your pace. Jenny, I can't believe you're here. Feel red spread across your chest. Here is the girl you used to know, her face flushed and pretty still, though swollen with age. Let your body twist. Let your arms fly up, even as your groceries fall to your feet with a clatter. Lunge in and holler as loud as you can, Virginia's not my fucking name. Roar into the glassy face of the grandchild the woman holds and tries to shield. Take in an endless jagged breath and tug the arms of your own wayward offspring. Slam the car door shut and swerve away to the stench of burning oil. Take in the tableau in the rearview mirror, gaping mouths, your daughter's eyes welling, and all those lost groceries which you can hardly afford to replace. Last 2 paragraphs. Know that they are real and you will soon find them, your father's letters. You'll unearth them in an antique chest varnished in mold that his own people gave to him. Each letter will speak of dull and dogged yearning. Each one will be hand addressed to you. Virginia, you'll confess in the foggy washroom mirror, your reflection thicker, age spots blooming on the backs of your hands. You'll look hard and wonder how the time passed so swiftly, how your mark on the world remained so shallow. Tell yourself you can still start again. There is still time. Tell yourself this time you'll trek a high pass in Asia. You'll sail to Antarctica to witness the great ice caps weeping. This time you'll fly to Africa to follow the last wild elephants run. You've heard they have a secret language, sonographic as whale song. You'll sing them a dirge and kiss the dust. Lay a humble ear to the ground and listen. You all are very nice. Thank you. That was the longest I've read in a while. I've never read that whole story, so thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions about stories, about being a writer, about anything that you all are interested in. Sure.
I really, really admire your writing. I promise not to ask you again, as I did last night, why a novella instead of a novel for my Monticello. We talked about the importance of it being a collection. And it's been such a successful publication. I'm wondering, speaking of Virginia, it's not your home. How has it been received in Virginia? And has it started a conversation about race?
Yeah, so that story I read to you is really more like a close story to a character, but there are stories in here that are really more about the world, right? So the opening story is about an incident of violence against a Black honor student at the University of Virginia, where I lived, where he was bloodied by uniformed officers, leaving a bar with being turned away from a bar, presumably with a fake ID, though it was just an ID from out of state, and ended up with 11 stitches on his head, and a lawsuit ensued. The novella, the biggest part of the story, was a very direct reaction to August 11th and 12th, 2017 in Charlottesville, which some of you may remember was our town was the unwitting host to the Unite the Right rally, when people, men mostly, came from all over the state to protest our decision to remove a Confederate statue of Robert E. Lee, supposedly, but really they came with torches, and they came with flags with, swastikas on them, and they came chanting things like "into the ovens," which is a callback to the Holocaust, when Jews and other ethnic minorities were killed by the state. And they threw propaganda in Black neighborhoods like mine, saying, this is not your home, basically. And so I was a public school teacher at the time. I teach little kids, so 3-year-olds to 11-year-olds, who were very aware, because we had a whole summer where as a precursor, the Ku Klux Klan came, for instance. We just had this whole summer of buildup, and then this really violent event where someone was killed, and where it was not good. This was before the storming of the Capitol. And so my question was, what do we do with all these things? I think I've gone far afield of the question. At any rate, so the book was me wrestling with kind of my biggest fears, not only about racial issues, but also about our environment, this thing that is the ground, the home beneath us all, which is almost unspeakable to think about. We often I wanted to talk about things that are hard to talk about for me, and things that worry me, that I wake up in the middle of the night worrying about. And so what I do think it actually has created conversation. The book, I was super happy. It just won the Library of Virginia Fiction Award, which was really, really lovely. But even better than that, I live in Charlottesville and the novella takes place on the street around the corner from me. So I'm like, I have really bad dogs. And so I'll be walking my dogs looking really not like a hobo, like just looking really bad. And then someone will like slow down their car and say, I'm listening to the audio book. So I definitely have like the hometown interest just because it's so about our town and then about Virginia, but then hope also it's about Thomas Jefferson. It's about what is America's promise? What do we owe one another? And what are we going to do for one another outside of the prices of gas immediately, but as our what are we going to make this place for one another? And so, yes, I've had a lot of those conversations. Any other questions? Yeah. Jacqueline?
That was an amazing story. I'm interested in your structural choice or your choices to, I was thinking of Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, which is short, but you sustain that for this life of this woman. Talk about why you made that choice, because that's a really interesting and I think really effective choice for that particular story.
Yeah, thank you for that question. People often act like there is intention in writing and there's a lot of work in writing, but often too, you try things and you see what works, right? So you like, or something occurs to you, or, you're trying to make something kind of better than you are as a writer. So you're often relying on all the reading you've done and your subconscious and what comes to you, and then being able to hear what's working and get rid of what isn't, or try something new. And so I often, even when I'm talking to myself, I often go into that you voice. So that story came out that first, they hung that name on you at birth, but Virginia was never your home. That part came out. And then I was like, why is this in this voice? So as I edited the story, as I had pieces of it, I had to think, what would justify a story being in this you voice? And then I thought, it's this person telling themselves the story of their life. They're admonishing themselves, they're encouraging themselves, they're just, and it's, life goes by so quickly as you get older. Those of you who are still young, it starts to feel very quick as you get older. And so that idea that the story is like accelerating, right? So she's like, it starts off young and she's like 16, and then it kind of just starts flipping through those pages. So I kind of got that structural idea and kind of justified it later. The stories, like I said, are really different. There's a story that's like maybe 5 pages long. That's a bulleted list. I'm a compulsive list maker. My tab list, I like put a post-it on the list with like a little sub list of what I should be doing. I want to collect those in a book someday. There's a story in the form of a letter from a father to a son. The novella, I looked at Notes of the State of Virginia, which is Thomas Jefferson's book about Virginia, which includes like all these lists of the mountains of Virginia, the heights and widths of rivers and the animals that are there and the native peoples and the skulls. But then it also has these like really both aspirational and really virulently racist remarks about Black and white people and Indigenous people and the people who were here then. So I used his structure when I wrote the novella. The novella is from the standpoint of a young Black descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, who lives in Charlottesville. There are real descendants of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings who live in Charlottesville now. And she is, in the story, this group of neighbors are rousted out of First Street. They end up taking refuge in Thomas Jefferson's home now, well, in the near future, very near future. And so she's reading Notes of the State of Virginia. So her notes take the form of his. So they have like these Roman numeral sections. They kind of mimic the form because in the story, she's looking at that. So I'm always just kind of looking for forms that fit and reflect and hopefully bring just another layer of interest for those people who are noticing them and just variety for the reader. We're good. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you listening.
All right, let's take about a 10-minute break and then we'll come back here. We have 2 more fantastic writers to listen to.
Two, mic check, 1, 2. Check 1, 2, mic check 1, 2.
Great, what about yourself?
Yeah, I've had a number of statements that say like both of them. You know, I mean, it's either one of them.
No, well, no, I do. Well, no, I just, I'm like. Yeah, but don't bring
We're getting ready to get started again.
Still got more things to talk about. I just started back with
Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is going to be Adam Vines. He is professor of English and the director of creative writing at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where he edits Birmingham Poetry Review. Under his tenure, he received the AWP Small Press Publisher Award. He had an MA in English from the University of Alabama and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Florida. He has published poems in Kenyon Review, the Southern Review, and Poetry, among other journals. Amongst the many honors that he has garnered, his writing has been nominated 6 times for the Pushcart Prize, as far as I could count. And his book, Out of Speech, won the Alabama Poetry Society Book of the Year Prize in 2019. And generally interesting fact, he has visited Antarctica and went swimming in the Antarctic Ocean. He's interested in visual art and writing ekphrastic poems. His latest poetry collection is Lures. The back of the book states that, written almost exclusively in traditional, modified, and nonce forms, the poems in Lures renegotiate grief, trauma, Southern masculinities, and fatherhood with unflinching resolve. Vines draws much of its subject matter and imagery from fishing to reflect larger themes of what it means to be lured through memories of those who have passed and those who remain present.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's really a blessing to be back here at the W. This is my 3rd time, and to hear all these great readings. And like after hearing Derrick's, I came up to him after and I said, great, I've got a book to teach for my seminar next semester now. So I'm putting it on the list. I'm going to make the phone call today to the bookstore. And I know that that's going to happen throughout these readings. I'm going to want to teach these people and learn more about them. And I get to be a student here. Thanks, Kendall, for bringing me. Thanks to the W for creating this experience for all of us. Start reading from Lures. And just this morning, I was thinking about the impetus for Lures, and we think about the impetus for collections. A lot of times it's kind of delving in and ladling into some kind of primordial goo of emotion or creativity. And I realized that that may not be the case, that it's not just some nebulous pool that I'm dipping into, but there were poems that preceded this book in Out of Speech, which is an ekphrastic collection where I'm writing about all paintings, that really were ushering in these poems. I couldn't have written this book without writing a couple in this collection. I've always been someone who didn't seem to be able to write confessionally. Was very uncomfortable approaching the subjective I, so I would hide behind voices in my writing. In the first book, I was writing from the perspective of a 10-year-old boy in a coal mining community in the early 20th century, but all of my anxieties, all of my fears, all of my joys would kind of filter through that character in those persona poems. In the second collection, I was writing about paintings, and I had a grant. I was able to travel all over the United States and in Europe and Argentina and visit museums where I would look at the art live, and I would stand in front of a painting sometimes for 8 or 9 hours and draft and sketch on the side of it and think about implications, the social atmosphere, how we can stretch the frame around things in the museum to talk about these ideas of etiquette in museum and how we all in museums and how we just all need to step aside and start raving about the art. But, everyone seems so reverent. But looking back at those books, I realized that I was trying to come forward with my story, the story of my family, the story of me as a father, the story of me struggling to be a father when I lost my father and I didn't have that model present, the hypermasculinity that Derrick talks about. I grew up in a similar family, 3 brothers. My dad was a bricklayer. We come from a coal mining family. I didn't take a traditional path to academics. I was a landscaper, and it took me 10 years to do my undergraduate degree because I was, taking classes at night, and couldn't imagine myself being in a position right now. And I think that my family still thinks I'm full of crap when I say that. They're like, yeah, he cuts grass. I mean, half of them just think that, and I'm like, that's cool. I don't want to have to fight you with a tire iron out back to prove my masculinity to you like we had to back in the 80s. And in this new collection, I wrote all of these poems almost exclusively in traditional forms or manipulations of forms. And I find that when I took the paintings or I take these forms, that I am able to talk about my personal life in ways that I couldn't otherwise, because I still am uncomfortable. And maybe in my next books, I'll be able to approach that subjective I with a more honest and authentic approach. But as for now, I get to be a liar. And that's what's great about being a poet. I get to be a big, big liar. So there's parts of this that are a part of my life and parts that aren't. I love it when my friends come up to me and they say, man, I didn't know you were having problems with Melissa. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, the character is having problems with someone. We're great. They said, well, why didn't you write that? I said, the poem wasn't asking for that. It wasn't asking for strict adherence to autobiography. It wanted to go in another direction. And I don't want to get in a wrestling match with my poem. I'll lose every time. Maintenance for the Heartbroken is the first poem in the collection. Consider the houses we put together, the maintenance we do and don't do, the rotten eaves replaced, the shutters that a friend half scraped 3 years ago before the night took him back to needling that vein he thought he'd closed. Consider the toilets we spray with blue, then flush down, the ball of our love's hair we snake up from the shower drain and lift in a pinch of nape as if it were a mouse. Consider what we see now at 2 a.m. in the kitchen, the grout we might or might not finally clean. The bond that holds this floor together will remain, soiled or not, we know. Consider the neighbors' generators still chugging after they have long gone to bed, though the power to our houses is back on. Consider the meat and milk that didn't go bad. We will hear the engine sputter and cease before dawn. Consider the storm that dumped 9 inches of snow in Lubbock, Texas today. Yes, Texas. Consider the woman in Montana tonight, curled into the hollow spoon of her husband after telling him of her affair. Consider her lover as merely a context for another repair. Consider finding ourselves not as agency, but as a slow cracking of our shells from the weather of our lives. Consider a sand dune that takes its shape when the clouds drift, allowing the moon to untuck its light. Consider how the clouds seem to occupy the same space as that moon, despite their distance, how we distinguish liquids, solids, gases by their properties, their distances apart, the way they veil and unveil themselves to us, though at times, like tonight, we find in our chests that they must be compliant to their elemental change, but at their core are just the same. I'm going to read the last poem in the collection now. A bookend. This one, the first one was Maintenance for the Heartbroken. The last poem is Preservation for the Heartbroken. The stones I placed across the creek for us to bridge are scattered now. All who have crossed this stretch and looked at shed and reap of swell know me as a ghost, the shoal that tongues. The ripples spread. You spread, my love. The darter who took a chance and pipped. I want your gills, the way you navigate the water and air. The why is want. The need we breathe is now. At 50, the need is want, and want is need. I can't abide the dictionaries, what we will a moment longer, what we should because of time, what scales we shimmer, leave behind. I thought instead of going through the book, when we put collections together, hopefully we're still thinking in terms of like putting an album together. You don't see that very often with musicians anymore, but when I think back to 70s albums and 80 albums and even in the 90s albums that were put together very, very carefully. Now we see singles that drop, right? We don't really think in terms of a cohesive whole. Even in poetry collections now, because people are targeting contests. I was talking to someone about that this morning. You front load and you back load and you put some in the middle, but you aren't really thinking about trajectory as much anymore because so many people are entering these contests for poetry books to have their books published. I thought considerably about how I was going to put this book together because luckily I had a press who was going to publish it. I didn't have to think about front loading or back loading. I could think about the trajectory of it. And I don't know if it was successful or not, but I thought I would kind of breed in a row these poems from the beginning. My father was a bricklayer, like I said, and he worked on the weekends as well. And I worked with him a lot of times on the weekends from a very young age. I was mixing mud for him and, carrying bricks and brick tongs and, eventually became a bricklayer's apprentice and then a bricklayer with him. But I never saw my father really relax, ever. He was always working or trying to work to pay the bills. The times that I would see him relax was when he would fish. And he would wake me up in the middle of the night on school days, and he would have his B210 honeybee at the top of the hill. And we would have he'd have all the gear in there. He'd wake me up, we'd sneak out, we'd get in, and he'd roll the car down and pop the clutch at the bottom of the hill. And we'd go off to the Cahaba River and fish for 3 or 4 hours, then come back, take our, muddy clothes off and go back to bed like we had been in bed. I always thought that we were pulling one over on my mom. We weren't, of course. She knew exactly what was going on. But it was that bond that I thought that we had. But when I would see him fishing, it seemed like that was the only time when he found calm, where he was able to really, really think. And he was a very deep thinker, but he was always just driven by having to pay the next bill. My father's rod, fishing the skinny moon, in memory of Van Allen vines. While waiting on the Appaloosa bite, or channel cats would do, our fingers plucking our fishing lines below the first eyes, twitching livers we had hooked and cast into the river's craw. My father would relax, the only time I witnessed this. He'd stretch his legs and dig his heels and match a lucky strike to life. He'd drag and exhale that the night had pocketed the moon. The cats would bite. We'd be all right. I'd dig in deep like him and hum a hymn I still don't know the name of, nor did he, I don't believe. But in that dark, that settling loam, and that Alabama clay, that hymn was ours, and God was there or not. It didn't matter. The bills were paid. He held his rod. He'd be all right. Tell me a story. Father, tell me about the Moor who moored his boat in a moor, how he ate petrified alligator toes and hid his prayers in snail shells, how he turned into a bear, refused to hunt, spent his days licking the shadows of crows that stretched before him. Brother, tell me the one about the woman who planted her husband's pool cue in the ochre loam of her childhood creek, the smooth ash nodding into dogwood, the blue tips sobering blooms. Tell me about the woman at the dump, her eyes large and dark as a mule's, how she enters our dreams when she gathers our junk. Mother, tell her about the bricklayer who was taken away to rebuild the city of God, and how he didn't need a plumb line to lay the golden courses, how his trowel turned into a crappie when he was done. But this time, let me finish. His son mixed what he'd learned in Sunday school and comic books to try to make sense of it all. Wished he were Thor, winged crown of tinfoil on his head, his father's brick hammer dangling from a belt loop. How he descended into the underworld of the basement to find his father after the burning bush was just burning brush and the rainbow bridge was merely the long frown of the morning storm. River Elegy. This is in honor of Jake Adam York. Jake Adam York, he was a wonderful Alabama poet, taught at went to Cornell and then taught up in Colorado. And we had always admired each other, or I know I admired him anyway, but we would send emails back and forth when we would see poems of ours in journals or something. And that happened pretty regularly. And he was supposed to come to Alabama to read, and I was going to take him out to my property, and we were going to drink whiskey and talk about jazz and do what country boys do, deliver some trot lines. And 3 weeks before he was supposed to come, sadly, he had a stroke and he died. So this was me thinking about that trip that I would never take with him. River Elegy in memory of Jake Adam York. Also in Alabama, probably like Mississippi, when there's threat of snow, everybody goes out and for some reason buys the most perishable things possible. They clear that everybody wants milk and bread, nobody wants beanie weenies or anything, they don't think apocalypse, even though they're thinking apocalypse, And there's another little thing, there's a song in here by Erskine Hawkins that I keep returning to. Birmingham was a great jazz city, if people don't know. Tuxedo Junction. River Elegy. Yesterday's snow, not stars, fell on Alabama, but on my slow jam home over Red Mountain, behind a streak of bread and milk-stocked cars, chocked by a field of white. I can't keep humming the tune over and over, replacing stars with snow. Tomorrow I would have driven past Tuxedo Junction where Erskine Hawkins might have brassed those stars 75 years ago in Inslee, and over viaducts beneath which hoggers haven't hung rails with black snakes or pig iron cars in decades, and foundry molds haven't flushed orange for just as long. And on to the sticks through hollers where my kin ripped seams of coal and piled spoils in rippling rows, healing pulp pines in their stead. And on to beat 10 of the Warrior River, where fish camps outnumber churches, where a man stepping on another man's land might see a lightning still hunkered into the bank, or just how deep that river channel is. And on to the dirt road's end where my kin crawled out of the river, where I would have cut and split a seasoned white oak for your visit and piled rocks for a pit closer to the slough. So when we would have run and relivered that trot line by the skinny moon, we'd have fire close when we sculled back to the bank. Then over a skillet of skeeting yellow cap fillets, I would have mentioned the rendition still stuck in my head even today. Fitzgerald and Armstrong's and the absurd snow. And you would have gone on about you, an Alabama privet switch, driving through Colorado on winter days. And I bet I would have learned from you on that night that will never be what I had to learn on my own today. That Holiday and Coltrane flirted through that number too. And the song owes its breath to the 1833 Leonid's meteor shower, the night the stars fell. And I imagine you would have said what I'm thinking now, that a shower of 33 happens only once every couple of lifetimes, and even then it won't happen if you ain't paying attention. All right, I'm going to read a couple more poems. This is the title poem, Lures, and it's for Scott Harris, a close friend of mine who sadly passed away. Last summer's fishing failures dangled from trees, a rapala and jitterbug a stand of privet paid for, half-ounce jigs with rubber skirts and jelly worms with wide gap hooks on 10-pound tests. We tithed with overzealous casts at bass. Then off we'd go, our stringers bare, to find a yard to cut, a truck to wash, so we could fill the tackle box we shared again. Today is 12-12-12. The Mayan end, and I, a country boy in Brooklyn for the week, will hail a cab for the first time and think of cows unnerved by fish we missed and shouts of shit that followed, and dawns to dusks, and always back with you, my childhood friend. Our girls will never know that pond's deep hole a baseball diamond now fills, the city leader's bright idea. Or how their fathers sitting in the bleachers on Saturdays a couple of decades later can almost feel the stinging nettle against their thighs, the lunker largemouth sweeping the bed with her tail while plastic lizards jerk and drag across the third base line. Or how when we untrain our ears to baseball's cracking bats and bitchy parents, called strikes and alike, we hear the peepers sounding off and oaks on down the way, our mothers and fathers' voices calling us home, not too far behind or ahead. I'll read two more poems. Derrick was talking about infertility and hypermasculinity and how men don't make themselves vulnerable enough. And I wrote too about, my infertility in this book. So it's funny he would talk about it. I've got a couple poems here. And luckily we were able to get pregnant. But after losing a child, the sun is winking early daffodils, the yellow bells the same. The late spring frost will knock them back, but you were lost in turning soil, tomato seeds, the pills you plant. Your body hunches in shame or prayer. We haven't talked today. The curtains wrap around my cheeks like a wimple I can almost bear. And I am counting prey in webs, the mound that must have been a moth, the lightning bug, dirt dauber, its organ pipes upon the eaves, now all encased, escaping entropy. The fodder for a coming brood. I dug into your drawer last week, I must confess, though you can't hear, and found the ace of spades, the bookmark I gave you, not black enough these days, my number scrawled across the back. The window's less a way to see you now. It's just a wall like any wall, its molecules intact. You place a cage around the row you made and ball your gloves. The garden will beget what we cannot, despite the cold and rainless days ahead, and we will sow into ourselves, unsure of how we're fed. Luckily, we did have a daughter, and my daughter Every time I go to read, she says, "Daddy, I want you to read poems about me." And I said, "Of course, honey." And she always says, "No, I want you to read all of your poems about me." So she was always a precocious child, and she would wake up early in the morning and I would go in before light, and she would ask a question. She would say, "Yeah, I woke up with this question." This was a question that she had over a bowl of beans. So we were eating beans at dinner time. And this is when she was 8 or 9, I think. Question from a bowl of beans for Mary. A bite of beans, a long milk draw, and then a side glance. "What's it like to be a boy?" she asked. Tiresias first came to mind, the mating snakes he struck, the female dead, his 7 years in women's flesh that followed. Didacticism at its worst, I thought, especially how to explain his lie to Hera, the pleasures of the we and woo and homosocial bonds, the kind of myth an 8-year-old like mine would dig, then dig at me until I broke, explaining different parts in dumbass boys, the birds and bees. My wife was teaching dance that night and would have struck me blind if I had gone that way. Instead, I merely said, "It ain't bad." A lie, of course, then took another bite of beans. "The penis seems to be a lot of trouble," she said, while looking down into her bowl. And once again, I thought, deflect. I could bring Nana into play, and how at 8 I told my class about my front tail, unzipped my pants to show them when they said I lied. Miss Walker screamed, the long walk down the hole, how Nana let me think I had a tail for years, until that day when I walked home and Daddy told me about the penis, the stiff-tailed ways. "I know it ain't that bad, would hardly do for this." I said, "You're right, it is a lot of trouble. Stay away." I think I'll leave it at that on a I'll be happy to answer any questions. This poetry thing is probably I have the least amount of knowledge in that. If you want to ask about knot tying or fishing, or I have more acumen with that. Yes, sir.
That was a really long walk, my goodness. Do you have any tips for new writers like me and my fellow classmates who are in creative writing?
Yeah, like for writing poetry or just writing in general?
Writing in general.
Writing in general, I would write down everything that comes to mind. I've got things on little napkins. Because I worked so much when I was younger, I couldn't carry notebooks around with me. So I had all these little pieces of stuff. It seemed like I was thinking about ideas at the most unlikely times where I wouldn't have a pen, I wouldn't have a place to put it. And I would think to myself, even when I was smarter then and not, full of fog like I am now, that I would remember those things at the end of the day. You don't, and you don't remember the context. I would say do that. I would say read outside of your genre. I found that's the most important thing for me. I love reading poetry, but when I'm really sitting down to write, I love reading nonfiction. I love reading fiction, probably nonfiction more than anything, though. Articles on science, because I think we're kind of trained to go into this, into the kind of slippery lexicon of poetry. There's certain words, certain approaches that we're accustomed to. And when you start reading outside of that context, you start integrating things that surprise yourself. You start using more Latinate language. You start experimenting with what you can do with form, or maybe you saw something about math or science that interested you that ordinarily you wouldn't write about. It gets me off the subject a little bit, like as Richard Hugo would say, which is good for me. Another thing I would do is make sure that you write. I don't care what you're writing. It doesn't have to be within your genre. When I sit down to write, I'm not thinking I'm going to write a poem. When I write in form a lot, and I never think of that form when I sit down to write it. I start writing, and then somehow the form kind of adopts the language that I'm writing in. So I'm not someone who writes every day. Don't berate yourself if you're not writing. It's okay. Your reading, your experiences are probably more important than the writing itself. So make sure that you're not sitting there at the computer trying to write instead of just taking a walk. I trail run, I do all these things that I love to do. And I would like to think that those all inform my writing and they prepare me for writing. So be a human.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love how you likened putting together a poetry collection to an album. And I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit more about how you choose your order, how you hear that in your head and how you thematically work through that to create a cohesive collection.
Yeah, I think when I look at a grouping of poems, I know my second collection, because it was all ekphrastic poems, I kind of had a subject matter for it overlaying. I didn't realize that the thematic elements that were going to ribbon through it. So it wasn't about, oh, I'm going to have all my Rothkos here. I'm going to have this here. I'm going to have this here. It became more autobiographical. It became more concerned with the natural world in areas. It became more concerned with something outside of the painting, where the painting just became a launching off point. So I started thinking about elements there in ways that I could put the collection together. For this collection, I was thinking purely about fatherhood. And so that poems about my father and me as a child, about me as a father, and thinking about a child as my child kind of fathering me, which she does quite often with these questions. I'm just befuddled sometimes. I'm bewildered by her, as we all should be, the way she thinks about the world. And she hasn't been told fully what the world is yet. I think that that's one of the problems, is that we start putting constraints on what we know, and we start saying, okay, that's a fact, and we're not as creative anymore. We don't use our imagination as much. As Wallace Stevens says, it's got to be a blending of the imagination and reality. We've got to have imaginary gardens with real toads in them, as Marianne Moore would say. So I started thinking about creativity, fatherhood, what it takes, and the elegies started coming through, these elegies. But elegies are so intricately tied to joys too. I hope that when I'm writing elegies, that I'm also thinking of joyful moments that can infuse that it's not just about tragedy. It's not just about despair. So I tried to have some poems, you try to be funny, you screw it up. But if you just kind of quote your child, things become perfect, and you talk to your mama about what an idiot you were. And she's like, oh, what you didn't know is, do you remember when you were playing with the tampons and you flooded the whole bathroom? Yeah, I do. And then I said, where were my brothers? She said, we cleaned it up as quietly as we could because I knew what would happen to you with your big brothers. It's that kind of stuff, and then me thinking about tampons as being this magical wand that mom had, that nobody knew what they were. There's this blue box next to the toilet because we had one bathroom for 6 of us. So at any time, there's 2 in the tub, 1 on the pot and 1 at the sink. And we're throwing soap and toothbrushes and everything at each other. And, and there's mom's blue box of tampons right next to the toilet because we didn't have a vanity or anywhere for her to put them. And, kids aren't good aim. So I was always like feeling this is awful for her, that's. So anyway, thinking about childhood, masculinities, the important kind of maternal side that my mother gave me, and what a blessing it is to have a daughter who's informing my life right now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So we're part of the MFA program here, and we've been talking a lot about all the authors. And we're always curious, does the title come first or does the content?
The title of like individual poems, content.
The content comes
Yeah,
first.
I don't know what a poem's gonna, I don't know the title of a poem. I think I write collaborative poems too with a strap specialist with Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas, if that's odd enough. We went to graduate school together. He became a professional poker player and then started doing the straps, training. And before long, he was beating out former Olympians, and now he's on the biggest stage in the world for Cirque du Soleil. But we would write stuff and we'd send lines back and forth, 2 lines back and forth. And we were trying to trip each other up with syntax, and you couldn't change the end of the line. And when somebody said cooked, you had to quit no matter what. It's done. And the other person had to start out something else. Well, we never put titles on it, but I would write grants to go to Vegas. And we would complete these collections, while playing, Hold'em 9 hours a day. But we would come home after that, and we came up with titles after the fact. And we were doing it kind of in a row. We would kind of throw poems in a row and see how they were, almost arbitrarily, and then thinking, and they're the best damn titles I've ever had. And when I think about, go through like Wallace Stevens' collections and look at his titles. You know, they weren't subject matter titles. They weren't thematic titles. They weren't, you know, lines that were, you know, taken or stolen from the poem and put out front. So yeah, I've made it a point not to come up with a title first because I want to be surprised with what that title is. And also, I don't think I'm going to know that poem until I see the relationship it has with poems that are contextually connected in some way. So that will inform later on how the title should be placed within a grouping or suite of poems, which we think about when we think about putting the collection together, the trajectory of a collection. One more question? Fish. Yes.
So I'm really interested in your combination between poetry and the topic of fishing. I just think that's really cool, first of all. So I'm from a very small country town, if you will, and writing as an art form is not really a popular thing. So could you speak a little bit about your experience of combining these two seemingly opposing passions together? And also, what advice would you have for somebody kind of in that same situation, wanting to write about topics that may not seem popular among other poets or just writers in general?
Pay attention to the particulars of what you do and what you know. I mean, with fishing, everything's metaphorical. Everything is a trope for something else or some larger conceit. For instance, when I'm fishing, I'm a very, very serious fisherman. Everybody's like, oh, do you go get beers and hang out? No, I'm thinking mathematical variance. I'm going to cast in between 1,000 and 1,200 times. There is a pattern to this. I used to fish tournaments, you know, it was for money. You know, I mean, I've done a lot of gambling and stuff along those lines. So I knew about mathematical variance and to think about it in those kinds of terms, probability. You know, it's about accuracy of cast. So if I'm going to pitch at if I've got a stump row over there and I'm going to pitch at that stump row, I could be right up next to it and hit the fish, and it's going to create an aggression strike, you know, if they're not feeding. If I pitch 3 inches to the side, they're not going to touch it. So it's about having that skill set that you've gone over and you've got it in your toolbox or in your tackle box where you can reach in at any time and do something with it. It's about knowing the time of year, spawning patterns, you know, visibility and what I'm going to do, lure placement, which lures you're going to bring out. Is it going to be soft plastics, crankbaits, topwater baits, suspended baits? You know, all of these things are going through your head. And I think if you pay attention to those particulars and just thinking about grabbing a lure for that perfect day of clarity, in that perfect moment that you're looking out and you're saying, I need this, and how that transfers to our everyday, seemingly mundane lives, and how somebody looking from the outside at fishing would say, oh my God, that seems so damn boring, you know? And for me, it's absolutely thrilling, you know? And it's not necessarily just about catching the fish, you know, because you don't go fishing and you say, oh, I caught fish every time. No, that would be catching, right? I'm going catching. You're going fishing. So yeah, I would suggest that you don't throw away that lexicon of whatever that specific or that argot, that idiosyncratic language of that little cultural nook that you have, or that little specialty that you have. It's like in Florida, in Sopchoppy, Florida, they do a world worm grunting contest. I bet there's not many people in here who even know what worm grunting is. Worm grunting is where you get a tractor spring, a leaf spring. You find good ground that's probably been given to you from generations before. I mean, 3-4 generations. You put this thing in the ground, you get a hickory stalk, and you run over it as if you're a cellist. And it's vibrating the ground. The guy's just kind of groaning over his sins. He's bringing it back and forth. And the worms, they think that it's thunder, or so scientists believe, and it's going to rain, so they rise to the surface. And they pick up these worms. And again, he's playing this thing, he's luring them into it. And then he's packing it full, and it's to make money. You know, it's early spring when everybody's going to the brim beds and he's catching night crawlers, you know. Somebody wants to go catfish, you know, so he's putting 12 or 14 of these night crawlers in there to lure them. But it's that kind of specific. You have that knowledge. People need to know that knowledge. It doesn't need to die in that little cultural nook of yours. Also, it expands to the globe. You know, it's just, it gives me chills now to think about watching some of those old fellas on a 5-gallon bucket just grown out of it. I'll leave. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Our last writer today is Holly Goddard Jones. She has an MFA from Ohio State University and her BA from the University of Kentucky. She teaches creative writing at UNC Greensboro. She's the author of The Salt Line, The Next Time You See Me, and Girl Trouble Stories. Her work has appeared in the Best American Mystery Stories, New Stories from the South, Tin House Magazine, and elsewhere. She was a recipient of the Fellowship of Southern Writers Hillsdale Prize for Excellence in Fiction and of a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. In the Adroit Journal, Evan Fackler writes that in Holly Goddard Jones' new story collection, Antipodes, one of the South's most vital short story writers turns toward fabulism to grapple the strangeness of contemporary experience. From living through a global pandemic to facing new motherhood against the backdrop of climate despair, to the alienation of digital technologies and modern political discourse. And in the April-May 2022 issue of Garden and Gun, Jonathan Miles writes that her latest story collection is blazingly alive. Her characters have moms and kids and Pinterest accounts and antidepressant prescriptions and husbands who can be sweetly earnest but miss the point all the same. Her 11 stories crackle with the messy, bristly particles of the modern life and record what the poet Cat Ryan called the small plop of ordinary lives. Make what you'll find is a fresh and invigorating weirdness. She dashes her realism with fabulism, horror, suspense, satire, even an 8th teaspoon of paperback romance.
Hi, thank you for your endurance yeah, for being here. This is my second time doing the symposium. I had such a wonderful time. The first time, I'm enjoying it immensely. This time, especially after the lockdown and the weirdness of the last couple of years, going on the last few years. So it's really gratifying to be here. So thank you to Kendall for having me back, and thank you to the W. Thank you to Kendall for driving around a bunch of authors who can't seem to be in the lobby at the right time and have to ask over and over again, now when are we supposed to do this thing and what are we eating? And so his patience is really admirable. So I was talking to some people in the Welty class last night and going back and forth on what to read. And what's kind of interesting is what people react to in a thing you write is not what you would always expect them to react to. And I've found that the story I've decided to read from, which is called Exhaust, is one that I hear back from readers about a lot. And it's a kind of spooky story, and it's the season for spooky. So I figured I would read from it. I won't be able to finish it. I think I'll read about half of it. So this is Exhaust. 1. They had risen early in the dark and loaded their car as silently as they could, though the guest room was upstairs, right across the hall from Alan's parents, and the hardwood floors rasped under even the lightest and most careful of steps. Toby followed at her ankles as he always did, downstairs to the car, back up to the room as she conducted her last once-over. When she got on her knees to check underneath the bed for one of Alan's stray athletic socks, which had a way of warming themselves out of sight until every suitcase was zipped tight and stowed away, the dog put his long snout behind her right ear and snorted. Elise laid a distracted hand on his thick collar of fur, scratched. All clear, she whispered to him. The dog backed up and came forward again, his long tail making a low, nervous wag, toenails scratching the floor. He followed the progress of the suitcases and stayed close, as though he suspected that Elise would leave him behind, given the opportunity. She stripped the bed because she knew that Alan would not think to. The sheets she wadded into a pile and set on the floor. The quilt she folded neatly and centered at the foot of the bed. She tweezed dog hairs off it with her thumb and forefinger, knowing that her mother-in-law would see them later and comment, "That's what you get when your grandbaby's a dog." She had said that more than once in a voice that was supposed to be joking but wasn't. Cynthia pretended to enjoy Toby, patted her lap when she was watching television in her old blue recliner, winced when the dog took her up on the offer and plopped all 45 pounds of himself on top of her. "Lord have mercy," she would say, her face for a single second open and annoyed before contorting into its familiar expression of genial exasperation. Always the same routine. They had made it to the foyer, their last and lightest bags shouldered, when Cynthia appeared at the top of the staircase in her long pink nightgown, robe, and matching terry cloth house shoes, the kind that slipped on and left her thick, yellowed toenails exposed. She had donned her glasses, but was lifting them to rub her eyes as if she were Cindy Lou Who and the Grinch himself was traipsing around downstairs, ruining her holiday fun. "Mom, we told you to just sleep in," Alan said. "We're practically out the door." "Don't you want some coffee, some eggs and toast?" she said. She started heavily down the stairs, clutching the banister for support. "I don't know why on earth you have to be on the road this early anyway." Elise, as was her habit, stayed silent. Alan sighed and glanced between them. "We have to stop twice to charge the car and we want to beat the bad weather. We told you that. We both have work in the morning." "I still don't understand why you got a car like that. What if the charger's broke? What will you do then?" "We have an app on our phone," Alan said. "Someone used it yesterday with no problem. The charger's fine." "At least take a cup of coffee with you," Cynthia said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I don't think I could sleep now if I tried. You hear every little peep in this house." This, too, was a refrain of hers, and Elise reminded Alan of it every time he tried to put a move on her in the creaky brass guest bed when he insisted that he'd be really quiet and no one would know a thing. "Cynthia, we can just grab something when we stop to charge," Elise said. "I don't think I could stomach coffee just yet anyway." "I can't believe the price those places charge for coffee," Cynthia said. $4 for coffee and milk. It's more like $5 now, by the way. Mom, we're not going to spend $4 on coffee," Alan said. "It won't take 5 minutes to perk." Elise played her trump card. "The forecast is looking bad in West Virginia. I know you wouldn't want us driving through the mountains right as the snow hits." All right, Cynthia said. She put out her arms and waved her hands at Alan, beckoning him for a hug. He surrendered to her, letting her fold him against the bulk of her heavy breasts and smack his cheek with loud, cartoonish kisses. She subjected Elise to the same treatment, a ritual that had always made her cringe with discomfort. She hadn't come from such demonstrative stock as this. Alan's family, his mother and father, his 3 older brothers who had wives of their own and 8 kids among them, a mostly pale, red-haired crop of lanky giants like their fathers, were boisterous and exhausting, and they treated holidays and family reunions like performances, as if a hidden camera were trained on all of them, recording the fun. To be embraced by Cynthia was so intimate as to constitute a kind of violation. Those enormous breasts, so evidently braless through the thin nylon nightgown and matching robe, the oily, artificially sweet scent of the bath beads she used each night in the tub, her damp lips pressed against Elise's cheek, coming so close to her mouth that their noses nearly brushed like lovers in a movie. On the long drive between Pittsburgh and Charlotte, Elise would have time to feel guilty about her distaste for this woman who, despite her bullheadedness and sometimes outright obnoxiousness, was her husband's mother, and a very good one, Alan always insisted. But for now, she narrowed her shoulders and drew into herself, patting Cynthia's back half-heartedly. If only you didn't live so far off, Cynthia said, clutching her, breath as moist against her ear as Toby's was. I'll never get used to you living down in the South like that. Elise, your parents must be so grateful to see you as much as they do. Elise's parents lived in Asheville, 2 hours from her and Alan's home in Charlotte, and Elise saw them perhaps once or twice a year more often than she saw Alan's parents. This explanation had not worked the first dozen times she had made it to Cynthia, however, so she did not bother now. She just smiled tightly as she extricated herself from the hug and bent down to hook Toby's collar with his short red travel leash. Tell Steve we said bye. It's a shame he couldn't see you off, she said, but he needs his sleep. He could sleep through the second coming. Me, I couldn't sleep now if I tried. I hear every peep in this house. Just lie back down, Alan said. You might be surprised. I won't sleep for worrying. I hate to imagine you on the road all that way. Please promise me you won't speed on those hills and promise to call me the second you make it home. Promise, Alan said, kissing her cheek, and Elise fought an eye roll. These are little things she asks for, Alan had said to her once, and he was usually right. It was a phone call. It wasn't the end of the world. But Cynthia had been hard on her early in her relationship with Alan, and Elise was not good, apparently, at letting go of old grievances. They made it out the door finally, got Toby situated in his bed in the back seat. The car was toasty warm, the windows defrosted. Alan had thought to start it when he brought down the first of the suitcases. It was one of those marital trade-offs. Alan thought to start the car, Elise thought to strip the bed, and she tried not to be too cynical about how their roles occasionally divided along such conventional lines. Cynthia stood in the doorway, waving, and Elise felt instantly lighter, as if she could breathe for the first time in 3 days, her every action not scrutinized and commented on. Why are you in the kitchen, dear? Did you want something? Her lack of apparent enthusiasm regularly noted. I sometimes think it would take winning the lottery to get a smile out of this one. Her politics lamented, and I suppose you think Hillary would have done a better job? More than that, she was released from witnessing her husband's indignities. For a man of 33 should not have to wrestle off his 40-year-old brother, grappling with him until their shirts pull loose from their belted khakis and the tops of their tighty-whities show, and they almost knock over their mother's coffee table. Should he? Or reassure his mother in 4 different ways that he had enjoyed the overly salted rib roast she had cooked this year in place of the Thanksgiving turkey. Or defy his usual calm and thoughtful nature, the nature Elise had fallen in love with, to try to rise to the hyperbolic grandiosity of his kin, so that no meal was merely good, but the best thing I ever put in my mouth, and no traffic ever bad, but completely at a standstill, and no victory at canasta ever worth less than a triumphant procession around the living room to raucous cheers and boos, invisible scepter in hand. To spend a weekend with Alan's family was to see a side of him that he had kept hidden during the 2 years of their courtship, a side that he now packed away most of the year, like that heavy goose-down coat that he bought long ago for a Pittsburgh winter, but used only once or twice in North Carolina. They were approaching the I-79 on-ramp when Alan offered the opening gambit of their ritual 8-hour post-Thanksgiving bickering. In another 30 minutes, it might have been Elise. She might have cracked in the silence and muttered, your mother knows good and well that we don't see my folks all that much more than we see her and your dad, at which point Alan would have rebounded with, she didn't mean anything by it, to which Elise would have said, clenching the steering wheel and everything else, when doesn't she mean anything by it? But no, Alan beat her to it this time. As Elise signaled her turn onto the ramp and accelerated as she started looking over her shoulder to check for oncoming traffic, pointless at this ungodly hour, the sun still hours to the east, he said, you know, I wouldn't have minded having some coffee and breakfast. We should have just let her make it. And something cruel and furious bloomed in Elise, but there was a spiteful joy in it too. And she put her foot down heavily on the pedal, going 85 in the empty Sunday darkness, aware somewhere deep, deep within her that this argument would get them at least as far as their first charging stop in Morgantown, and then they could just put on a podcast to pass the time. 2. Their cell signals were weak in the mountains, so Alan started flipping through radio stations as they got back onto the interstate after charging. They each had coffees from a gas station filled dutifully in their insulated travel mugs, and Alan occasionally passed Elise a bite of stale blueberry muffin. Even this, in the acrimony of their recent argument, was a concession to him that she hated to make, taking food from his hand. But she was hungry and she did not want to try to drive and disentangle the plastic wrapper at the same time, so she allowed it. Finally, with her stomach quiet, her shoulders and the set of her jaw loosened enough for her to say, when he rolled to the strongest signal on the dial yet, "Holly Jolly Christmas," some kind of awful mixed up rock and roll version with lots of guitar brandishes. "Well, they don't waste any time, do they?" He agreed that they didn't. The silence became companionable, and Alan didn't change the station, though the subsequent Christmas song was just as grating. It was cheerful noise in the gloom, and though it was a little after 5 a.m. now, the sky was overcast enough that there was still not much sun, just a vague haze to the left of them, like the brief glow of a television screen after it has been shut off. These trips were always stressful. They brought out the worst in her, and though they didn't bring out the worst in Alan, Elise wasn't convinced that he had a truly bad side. His darkest self was the one that cried, "Eat it," when he beat her at a hand in a Randolph family penny poker game. They made him a little spacier, a bit less thoughtful than usual. He became, in the presence of his bullying big brothers, her own bullying big brother, teasing and pestering, needling her with comments that he knew would set her off, like this one about his mother making coffee and breakfast. And all of this, after 8 years together, hit a little too close to home. It was on these long drives to and from their families that their most naked fears about the marriage surfaced. On drives such as these, Elise had admitted tearfully that she resented shouldering most of the burden of the housekeeping, though she and Alan both worked full time. "Just tell me what to do and I'll do it," Alan said, sweetly earnest, but somehow missing the point all the same. And Alan on another trip, or hell, maybe it had even been the same one, had said, "I'd appreciate it if I didn't have to have a special occasion and a bottle of wine to get a goddamn conjugal visit." They argued about their jobs, about how to spend their money and where to spend their free time. Less often, they argued about politics. They were more or less on the same page, except when they weren't. And religion, because Alan had the occasional pang of Catholic guilt, most often immediately after weekends among his staunchly church-going kin. "I really ought to find a parish in Charlotte," he'd say, fishing for an offer from Elise to join him. And her response was always an even but wary, "Yes, of course you should, if that's what you want." Alan reclined his seat and closed his eyes. "God, I'm tired." "You falling asleep on me?" "Trying not to," he muttered. He twisted in the seat and grimaced. "That bed kills me. My back can't take it anymore." "We're getting old for all this." "Old," he snorted. "Guest beds, living out of suitcases." She saw the distant glow of headlights in her rearview mirror. "They treat us like children, my parents too." "And will until we have children," Alan said. "So forever then." She shot a glance at him. He put his hands out in a "what can you do" gesture, eyes still closed. "Yeah, probably." Their small car hummed with eerie silence, and Elise checked the charge. The electric car was her idea and her baby, but range anxiety was real, and the span between here and the nearest supercharger took them to the edge of their predicted mileage. She fiddled with the heater, eyes darting between the road and the accessories panel. If she shut the heat off completely, it looked like they could get another 10-mile cushion. "We have plenty of charge to get to Beckley." "I know, I'm just being cautious." "It's already getting cold in here," Alan said, and Elise snapped, half kidding, "Oh, man up." But he was right. It was in the 60s back home, according to the weather app on her phone, but this part of West Virginia had decided it was winter. The lights in her rearview mirror were approaching with almost startling speed. Elise checked the speedometer. She was going just under 80, so the vehicle, which was now passing her with ease, must have been doing 95 at least. The car was long, white, not old, but not new. Elise couldn't venture a guess at the make, having never been a car aficionado, and it occurred to her too late to make a meaningful adjustment that it was the kind of boxy, bulky, gas-guzzling vehicle that might well be an unmarked police car. She braked out of habit, needlessly, because the car sped off ahead, and she noted before it did that the car had a West Virginia plate. The tailpipe chugged out blue, oily smelling smoke. "Fucker," she said, "hope you break down." Alan grunted and opened an eye. "Huh?" "Nothing," she said. "Your coffee's going to get cold." He had his arms across his chest and his coat covering him like a blanket. Even with the seat set back as far as possible, his long legs were folded awkwardly against the glove box. "Just a nap," he said. "Uh-huh. Just some beauty rest, and I'll drive us the rest of the way home. Promise." He was already mostly checked out, so she exhaled loudly and focused all her attention on the road, though there wasn't much to see now that the white car had disappeared ahead. The landscape at this hour was beautiful in a kind of apocalyptic sort of way, everything gray and falling off sharply on both sides of the road, only to rise ominously a bit farther out, carving craggy silhouettes into a dun-colored sky. Autumn, still clinging to the trees back in Charlotte, was gone here. As if in confirmation of this observation, a flake of snow hit Elise's windshield, followed immediately by another and another. The weather system she had seen forecast yesterday on the news. "Look," she wanted to tell Alan, but his breathing had already gotten nasal and stretched out, and she knew that he would not appreciate the sight as much as she did. Snow had not been a novelty to him growing up, more of a pain in the ass, he told her, and they almost never canceled school. She looked over her shoulder at Toby. He too was asleep, gray nose tucked into his tail. Her boy, her tired boys. She was tired too, so she sipped her coffee and tried very hard not to feel so lonesome. She wanted to turn the dial off the Christmas station and cue up one of her podcasts, but was afraid that doing so would startle Alan. So she listened to that waitress's song with the monotonous hook that she knew she'd have stuck in her head for the rest of the day, a little pleased with it despite herself. The way Alan would have been pleased with the snow despite himself. There were things in a life that you appreciated because they had their time and their place and pretty much left you alone otherwise. Snow, Christmas carols, distant family. She turned a curve and braked suddenly because the taillights appeared out of nowhere, the car they belonged to going slowly enough that Elise wondered for a moment if it wasn't getting ready to pull onto the shoulder with a flat. She signaled and floated into the left lane, heart thumping. She had put her hand on her chest, a prissy, uncalculated gesture that made her laugh at herself a little. "Jesus," she hissed as she went ahead, and she saw that the car was the white one from before, the one that had been going 90-something and passed her as if she were sitting still. A Chevy Impala. She could read the make as she cruised past. She looked ahead again, feigning disinterest as Alan's window lined up with that of the other car's driver. She didn't want to be caught staring. She was satisfied, though, that the car wasn't pitching to the left or right. There were no obvious signs of distress, so she applied enough speed to get ahead of it and tried to scope out the driver in her rear view. She couldn't see much, but she felt certain the person was male, probably texting. She hoped that the braking had roused Alan so that she could complain to him, but he murmured and shifted and didn't open his eyes. She resumed going 80 and started watching for the exit to Highway 19. Alan accused her jokingly of road rage. She took other people's driving personally and held short-term grudges. If the car that cut her off in a tight two-lane traffic later got caught behind a semi so that she could roll past it, the tortoise to its hair, she cackled triumphantly and told Alan, "That's what you get when you don't have any patience." When a car rode her bumper, she started braking so sharply that Toby would get up in the back seat, circle, and drop with a huff as though voicing disapproval. It was, like the bickering, something to do, a way to occupy the mind on a long trip. She could admit that much. But when the lights of the Impala flashed brightly again in her mirror, bearing down on her as quickly as it had the first time it passed her, Elise felt not rage, but a tremor of unease. The Impala was fucking with her. Maybe it was her and Alan's bumper stickers, which were a little crunchy, but not outright political. They'd bought this car after the election, trading in the Bernie Sanders sticker still attached to their old Toyota, and she hadn't had the courage yet to replace it with a candidate for 2020. She had been stupid and optimistic last time. She was superstitious now. So no outright politics then, though she supposed your average MAGA guy could take offense at be good to each other and thank you, science. And for that matter, your average MAGA guy might take offense at the fact she was driving an electric car, period. God forbid she not perfume the mountains with her blue smoke. Perhaps with Alan slumped down so low in the passenger seat, she looked like a woman alone, and that realization made her yet again want to rouse her husband. But no, that was stupid. The exit ramp to 19 was a mile ahead according to the signs, and she could very well make it that far without calling on Alan like a goddamn damsel in distress. What she felt now was the sensation of waking in the middle of the night after a bad dream. She had always been a restless sleeper, and even until her mid-20s, a sleepwalker. And her nightmares were vivid enough to this day that they sometimes left her sobbing, and saw Alan a foot away that might as well have been light years, sleeping so deeply that her cries hadn't reached him. She would think about waking him, knowing that he would embrace and comfort her and not even be grumpy about it. But her higher reason always kept her silent and trembling because she didn't want to disturb his sleep on a work night, and because she should, as a grown woman, be able to talk herself out of the heebie-jeebies. It wasn't Alan's responsibility to do that for her. Not then, not now. She slowed to 65 and fixed her eyes ahead as the car inched around her. The driver was taking his time, she thought. She felt his eyes on her, but she refused to even glance to her left. She turned, pretended to fiddle with the dial on the radio as if there were nothing unusual about this game of leapfrog they were playing on an almost empty interstate, as if the coffee she had drunk wasn't making a bitter bile in the back of her throat. The car finally sped up and pulled ahead, though it was matching Elisa's speed now in the left lane. She saw with relief the exit ramp for 19 and, out of habit, out of respect for an ordered universe, put her signal on, bearing the steering wheel to the right. That would be the end of it, she thought. The driver of the Impala had amused himself with her, had made the time pass by frightening her, but his signal wasn't on now. He wasn't even in the right-hand lane, so their paths would diverge, and Elise would take the road slightly less traveled by. Goodbye and good riddance. Her wheels had just grazed the seam between the interstate and exit when an engine revved and a flash of white swooped in from her left, darting across her vision so quickly that it took her a second to register that the Impala had cut her off, was now slowing ahead of her into the 360-degree turn downhill. Real, she thought. Oh my God, this is real. She could smell singed rubber. As the ramp straightened into the 4-lane highway, the Impala put on speed again, a bright square of white in what had become a flurry of fat flakes that melted against the hot glass of Elisa's windshield. She put on her wipers and kept her speed low, topping out at 55. She wiped her damp palms on her blue jeans. Ahead, the white car's rearview lights were dwindling, but she didn't allow herself to hope this time that the driver of the Impala had decided to continue his trip and forget about her. What was worse, she wondered, having him in front of her or behind? Her mind was going wild. She imagined him hidden up ahead in one of the turnoffs the cops used to trap speeders. Or what if he fell back again and she had to see those headlights widening in her rearview mirror like startled eyes once more, and instead of passing her, he bumped her, forced her off the road. What then? For a while, she didn't register how long. She drove stiffly, hands at 10 and 2, jaw set. She slowed into turns. The scenery on 19 had always been her favorite part of the trip to and from Pittsburgh, and the snow rendered it more startling, but she could barely look at it. Her vision had narrowed to the column of gray road ahead of her, and everything else was dark and distant, her tongue thick and dumb in her mouth. A vehicle approached in the opposite lane of traffic, and she flinched, thinking that he had made a U-turn to come back to her, but the lights belonged to an old green pickup truck with a covered bed and an attached ladder, and it passed on as quickly as Elise had spotted it. When the taillights appeared again, and she knew them to be the Impalas now, those 4 red circles like cigarette burns, she was almost relieved. It had been worse not knowing where it was. She slowed, reluctant to pass it again, and shook Alan's shoulder. Alan, wake up, He roused in that way he had, abrupt and decisive, rubbing his face briskly, as though he had been caught snoozing in school and didn't want to get the ruler across his knuckles. What? Yes? We stopping? Elise saw that she was getting down now to 50 miles an hour. No, she pointed at the Impala. This guy's been screwing with me. His voice was suddenly sharp, interested. Speed up and get around him, leave him behind. You don't understand, she said, surprised at the hoarseness of her own voice, the lump in her throat. I've passed him a couple of times. He speeds up again, gets off way ahead, and then slows down. He's doing it again. He's going to keep slowing down until I have to pass him. Alan leaned forward and lifted his seat back into position. Just get around the guy. It's probably some teenager. I'll stare him down as we pass. Please don't be confrontational. Please, Alan. He's freaking me out. All the more reason. Speed up. She put on the gas, 60, 65. The white car sped up too. Just punch it, Alan said. I'm not going to punch it. Punch it, damn it. Do you want to be dealing with this guy all the way to Beckley? She let out a shuddering breath and slammed down her foot. The car lunged forward, again with that eerie electric silence, and Toby, she had forgotten about him, barked in his grouchy, anxious way. She was up to 80 now, 85. The Impala stayed 2 car lengths ahead, 90. Elise knew that the Impala probably had at least 6 cylinders, that she wouldn't be able to outrace it if the driver was determined not to let them. They were doing a trembling 95 now, and out of habit, she glanced at the car's efficiency indicator and saw, predictably, that they were in the red. If they kept this speed much longer, they definitely wouldn't make it to the next supercharger. Alan, keep going. I think he's coming off the gas some. Damn it, Alan, she shrieked. And she was lucky that she had refocused her eyes on the Impala's back end because she saw his taillights brighten in barely enough time to brake herself and make a sharp turn to the left lane. Toby fell heavily in the floorboard with a howl, jostling the back of Elise's seat. Go, 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 Alan was saying, and she laid down on the pedal again, not daring to look to the right at the driver or even at Alan, because she heard the first real trace of fear in his voice just then, and that meant that this was serious, that she hadn't just been working herself into a panic over nothing, and she didn't want to see her terror mirrored in his expression. I'm going to stop there. So, thank you. And I know you've been sitting for a very long time, but if you have a question, I'm happy to answer anything.
So I'm not going to spoil the endings to anything, but your endings are really good.
Oh,
I was wondering, how do you know when to leave well enough alone, though? Because when we were reading your stories, I don't know that I could just leave well enough alone, so when do you know? Dr. Dunkelberg was saying perhaps maybe you write, and then perhaps maybe you're like, well, let's just cut it off here. Or maybe you just get to you gotta go buy the book and read the book so you know what I'm talking about, because I promise I won't spoil anything. Or maybe you just get to the end and you're like, boom, I'm just gonna let you, the reader, mess with yourself, because the endings are really good.
Oh.
So could you maybe explain a little bit of your process?
Thank you for saying you like the endings. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I feel confident that I have landed it in the way that you're talking about. And so I don't know that I can speak to a definitive moment where I recognize that, okay, this is the spot. I mean, with some stories more than others, I think I kind of knew vaguely the larger shape of the thing, and so I could feel myself moving toward that goal. The first story in the collection, for example, I knew that last image. And so I knew where I was driving toward the entire time. This story that I just read from as an example, I mean, I think what's kind of interesting, and I won't give anything away in case, you know, anyone happens to want to read the story, but it's one where people ask me a lot, what happens next at the end. So people want to know. And I don't know if it's a cop-out or if it is legitimate, but I don't really know. And I think with that story and with the collection in general, I saw this meme the other day. I think it was someone's Twitter post or something, and I might not be quoting it completely accurately, but it said something like, I'm going to write a book called Intuition or My Anxiety, a memoir. And I feel like that's sort of this book. Is it intuition or is it anxiety? Is it something that is real and I'm seeing it and other people need to see it too? Or is my mental illness creating problems or exaggerating problems? And so with Exhaust, that sort of felt to me like, I don't know if it's as bad as she thinks it is. And that's kind of what interests me about it. That sort of moment where, and this is later in the story, but if you've ever had a loved one who wasn't home when they were supposed to be home, and there's that kind of black box moment where they could be fine and it was all in your head, or the worst could have happened. I was interested in that because when you're there, it feels completely real, whether it is or not. So that doesn't really answer your question because I don't know how to. I mean, I think, you know, one bit of wisdom I heard about endings way back was that, you know, a short story is done when you can, you know what is going to happen, even if you don't want to acknowledge what that thing is that's going to happen. And that's where you leave people. But I don't know if I follow that, actually. It sounds good. It's a great question, though. Thank you. Any other questions?
I absolutely loved your characterization in these stories, and I would like to hear a little bit more about how you develop characters and get to know them either before writing the story or if you're playing around and exploring their worlds as the story is being written.
Thank you. Thank you for that compliment. I really like characterization. How it works is a little mysterious to me. I feel like, you know, Adam was talking a little bit about poems and putting oneself into poems and the line between confessional and kind of, you know, channeling that part of you into a persona poem. And I feel kind of similarly about fiction. I'm actually working on a novel that has some autobiographical elements, but in a completely different context from my own reality. And so that veers more into the personal than I generally am comfortable going. But I feel like a lot of times what I do with characters is that there's a grain of me at the core of all of them. And then I build the fiction around that. And that touchstone, that thing I can connect with, even if the character is otherwise completely different from me, is what allows me to make those other connections. And then I feel like we talk a lot in workshops about detail and about effective use of detail, which is really important. But I think when I was a younger writer, I saw details as something to attach to my predetermined meaning. And what I feel now as I've matured as a writer is that I actually sort of intuit details and then I figure out what they mean. And sometimes I reverse engineer character from the things they surround themselves with or their reaction to a road sign that they pass. So yeah, that tends to be my approach. So thank you
so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you again to all four wonderful authors. It was fantastic hearing you today. Thank you for everybody for coming. I want to remind you that there is a session this afternoon and one tomorrow morning, and we hope to see a lot of you back. Thank you.